So my name's Aidan Pollitt, and welcome to welcome to our house up in Liverpool, actually. The today's session is really a very basic kind of introductory overview of DoLS and LPS. It isn't intended obviously to be a full training course. We've only got an hour, so we're going to have to whip through some of the slides that we've got for you. But you'll get a copy of the slides afterwards, which is good. So you'll be able to look at those in a little bit more detail, some of them afterwards, especially some of the more explanatory slides around the LPS and everything that we'll come to a little bit later. I've got to say, neither is this intended to be a legal advice workshop. I'm an advocate and I'm not a lawyer. So please don't take anything that I say as being anything to do with legal advice. Now, what we've got first, though, it's a little bit long, but we thought it'd be really good. It helps us to orientate ourselves towards what we mean by this change over from the deprivation of liberty safeguards to the liberty protection safeguards. If I can apologise for using the anachronisms throughout the talk today of DoLS and LPS, I hope you'll forgive me for that, really, as well. So yeah, Kate's going to help me today with moving on the slides. So if you hear me say next and all that business, that means if we can move the slides on a little bit. So if we can just take a few minutes. This is I think about 10 minutes long, something like that. But it really does mean that I can whip through some of the presentation slides afterwards. It's a film that is just it's hot off the press from Sky. Occasionally I do some training for Sky, the Social Care Institute for Excellence, although I'm not there in that capacity today, and neither am I here in the capacity as an advocate. I work for Health Watch Holton up in Merseyside as an IMHA, and IMCA I'm training at the moment under the careful and studious guidance of Kate, actually, to be an IMCA and advocate. So where this talk came from actually was as part of that, I've got a real interest in this transition from DoLS to the liberty protection safeguards, and I've kind of tracked it through from its inception of the Mental Capacity Amendment Act right through to today. I'm hoping that the information that I can give you today is as up to date as I've been able to find over the last week or so. It must be said, though, that what we're waiting for, we're desperate for at the moment, is the code of practice, the new code of practice, which is said to be out for consultation very soon, and that's going to give us a lot more meat to be able to chew on in this respect. But it's not out yet. But I'm told that it's going to have something like about 26 chapters to it, something like that. And then, of course, there are the new regulations that will come out as well that will sit behind the liberty protection safeguards and make the Amendment Act work as well. But anyway, what we have got is this film from Sky, which I think really helps us to augment our minds before we start to look properly under the bonnet. So maybe Casey, if we could have a look at that now, please.
Liberty Protection Safeguards. Looking forwards. Eleanor Roosevelt, the diplomat and activist who oversaw the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is quoted as saying,
"Where, after all, do human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world, yet they are the world of the individual person."
The philosophy embodied in this statement underpins an amendment to the Mental Capacity Act, due to come into force in 2022. Known as LPS, the Liberty Protection Safeguards, the amendment shifts the focus from the deprivation of liberty, as until now has been the case, to the protection of liberty. Following a series of landmark cases which highlighted shortcomings in both the MCA and DoLS, LPS builds on the founding principle of well-being that underpins the Care Act of 2014. which set in legislation that the core purpose of adult care and support is to help people to achieve the outcomes that matter to them in their life. LPS is about making sure that we as a sector have done what we can to protect the person's liberty and rights to family life. The Care Act and Mental Capacity Act have built a solid foundation for the way we work in social care. The safeguards will help us to develop the processes we already employ. Further to the principle of well-being, there are 8 other significant principles woven through the tapestry of the Care Act, each guiding us to ensure that we keep the person at the centre of any intervention, including any that could result in a deprivation of their liberty. We should practice using a strengths-based approach to establish a quality relationship with the individual needing support. We should look first at what the individual can do, rather than just focusing on their difficulties. We should be practicing this way continuously, as promoting individual well-being, looking at the little things which mean the world to that person, is central to adult social care support. Under LPS, the sector is reminded of the necessity, right at the onset, to consider a person's mental capacity to make decisions, to work to promote liberty, to look at risk enablement pathways, thus maximising the person's gifts, skills and capabilities, to enable them to exercise their right to make decisions about their own life. If, during care and support planning, arrangements are needed to enable that person's care or treatment which may amount to a deprivation of liberty, this, regardless of the setting within which it will be provided, should be considered under LPS. Our conversations with individuals, regardless of the reason for the contact, should be working towards supporting the individual to have as much choice and control as possible. We must be taking into account the person's values, their beliefs, what is important to them and why. Often, things so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world, to enable this to be achieved. LPS places a duty on the sector to consult with the person to ascertain their wishes and feelings, and it is explicit that prior to putting any arrangements in place, we have actively encouraged and supported participation, ascertain the person's view as part of the best interest process, ensuring that it is the least restrictive option. Under LPS, the responsible body, typically the NHS Trust or local authority, must ensure that support is in place prior to any pre-authorisation assessments, and that an independent mental capacity advocate, IMCA, will provide this if an appropriate person is not available. However, if the person is identified to have at least substantial difficulty at the point that a Care Act assessment of need begins, then this support mechanism must already be in place. It may be from an appropriate person, an independent advocate, or an independent mental capacity advocate, if decisions are to be made in the person's best interest. LPS further reinforces the necessity to have a framework through which we can work together to maximise the person's involvement, enabling them to retain as much choice and control as possible. Transparency is about being clear to the individual and those representing them as to why a decision is being made, when it may be necessary to deprive an individual of the things which often may seem small, but which mean the world to them. LPS builds the protection of liberty into the existing care and support planning processes. The conversations around potential deprivations of liberty will take place sooner, and if we are working using strengths-based approaches, seeking to support the individual to have as much choice and control as possible, maximising their involvement in the discussions and the decision-making process, it should be easy to make our practice transparent. The Care Act recognises that a person's needs may impact on their families and support networks too. Under LPS, as consideration to the impact of a care and support plan on the person's liberty will be taking place prior to the deprivation, it will be done in the context of this principle. As such, discussions and potential for support of those impacted by the deprivation can take place. Being holistic is about ensuring that decisions consider all the individual's circumstances, their needs in the context of their skills, ambitions and priorities, and recognizing that it is not possible to support the person with needs without seeing how the person fits into their wider social network. To ensure that all the individual's circumstances are considered, LPS makes it a requirement to consult others. For example, anyone interested in the person's welfare. Under the Care Act, any intervention has to be of benefit to the person concerned, and it needs to be appropriate. What is appropriate will be determined by the level of needs of the individual. And as each individual's world is different, our response must be appropriate to that.
Under LPS, previously determined assessments may be used, such as risk enablement plans, capacity to consent to arrangements, and medical assessment of a mental disorder, if they remain appropriate.
This enables an appropriate level of intrusion in the person's world. Whilst there is flexibility under DoLS regarding the time frame for authorization, LPS will offer greater flexibility appropriate to the person's needs and not subjecting them to annual renewals. For example, for someone with end-stage dementia, it may not be necessary to renew on an annual basis as, on the balance of probability, their capacity will not return. However, the opportunity exists to request unscheduled reviews should an individual's circumstances change.
The principle of proportionality ensures that the level of support provided corresponds with the level of need, and no more.
We should protect human rights, which begin in small places, and we should not be intruding in these unnecessarily. Currently, the best interest assessment for a DoL authorization seeks to ensure that the deprivation is a proportionate response to the likelihood of the person suffering harm, taking into account the seriousness of that harm, and that the placement is necessary to prevent this. LPS considers how a care and support plan in any setting could jeopardize the person's liberty, and that the deprivation is proportionate to the perceived level of harm and subsequent impact of it. The Care Act recognises that contact with a person at a single point in time will not necessarily provide a full picture of their needs. As there is the expectation under LPS that the sector will be working to protect a person's liberty, there will be more scope to ensure that a fuller understanding of not only what is important for the person, but important to them and why. Those things so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world of the individual person.
LPS reinforces the necessity of the Care Act to ensure that the adult is fully involved, ensuring that their voice is heard and that they are, to the best of their ability, making decisions for themselves. As with DoLS, under LPS there is a specific duty for the responsible body to make sure support is in place. What is different under LPS is that it explicitly introduces a duty to consult and consider a person's wishes and feelings.
LPS involves the legal responsibility to protect liberty and places a duty on responsible bodies to assess for and authorise proposed deprivations of liberty in any setting, rather than authorising once liberty has been deprived.
Building on the successes of the MCA, DoLS and the principles of the Care Act, LPS may be seen as a recognition of the truth which lies behind Eleanor Roosevelt's statement regarding the origin of human rights.
Where, after all, do human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world, yet they are the world of the individual person.
To prepare for LPS, we need to take ownership of ensuring the rights conferred by the Mental Capacity Act are now realised, by utilising the already existing wealth of skills, knowledge and experience of the workforce, by preparing for the change of procedures, and be ready for a change to a system that seeks to embed the empowering ethos of the Mental Capacity Act. For more resources and support on the liberty protection safeguards, visit the Sky website at scie.org.uk/LPS.
So there you go. Sorry about the sound there, everyone. Yeah, I think it was a bit. It was a little bit low, wasn't it? I was struggling to hear it on my system as well. Hopefully, you got the gist of that, though, really from Sky. Because today's talk is really about how we can engage with LPS as advocates, really. The focus here is on advocates and our role as advocates. You can see just from that Sky video there that our role doesn't change all that much, really. Certainly the fundamental role to involve and to get people's views and to be able to look at the very detail. We're really good at that as advocates. That's what we do. So that role isn't going to change. But today's talk will kind of naturally lean towards the role of IMCA in respect to DoLS and LPS. And that's because the central and kind of statutory role that we play as IMCAs when we speak about depriving someone of their liberty. However, it must be said, and that film from Sky underlines this with massive, great, big, bold pen. It's got to be said that it's equally important for us as Care Act advocates, as HIMHers, as RPRs, soon to be changed, as you'll see soon, to keep up to speed with these developments, because we really need to be able to touch base as advocates with this whole programme of changes. So that's what we're going to be thinking through today from an advocacy perspective, and we'll be reminding ourselves of what the DoLS and LPS frameworks are in the first place. Hopefully we'll be able to make this into as much of a conversation as possible by using those interactive tools that Kate spoke about before, and the magic, of course, of Zoom. Not the magic of the order of Zoom, obviously. But we've got a few quizzes to start off with, really, just a few poll questions. Just finally, though, this talk today might inspire more kind of questions than answers, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to answer some of your questions, having kept track of the LPS framework. But if it doesn't, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we'll do our best to keep this conversation going as advocates about the LPS framework. As I said before, really, it's really unfortunate that the code of practice isn't out yet, because that would give us something more to chomp down on. Anyway, let's just start. This first question really is, if you could just go to the first one. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, just really to test our system as well. So, what does what does DoLS stand for? So, if you could just quickly, if you like to, just fill it in. It's not particularly difficult. That I think you've just been told through the Sky one. If you could just do that very quickly. You've literally got about 10 seconds to do that. And then on to the next slide, please, Kate. There you go. Everyone got that one right. Well done. Brilliant. That's fantastic. The next slide, though, might be a little bit more contentious. So here we get a chance to look at the importance of different advocates, keeping up to speed with the DoLS and LPS framework. Which of these people does DoLS, as it stands at the moment, not apply to? And you got a single choice here, but there may be one or two that could be right or wrong. So just have a crack at that, if you don't, quite quickly, if that's okay. 10 seconds, and that is counting down in my head. Okay, so how do we get on with that one, Kate? That's interesting. It obviously does apply to people living in a care home. That is correct. Most people have got that one right. It doesn't apply to people, you're right, who are under the age of 18, although that's just about to change with the liberty protection safeguards, because that will extend to over 16-year-olds. which is a really interesting issue for us as advocates, of course, especially if you are an advocate working with young people, because that means you've got a whole new thing to do in terms of training, I think, in terms of the Mental Capacity Act and those, these are advocates that might arise out of the Children's Act duties that local authorities have to appoint advocates for young people, for example, in children's homes. So that's a really interesting development from the LPS. So people who are sectioned under the terms of the Mental Health Act, I think a lot of people have got that right, yeah. Does it not apply to those? A guardianship, for example, if someone's on a guardianship, which is, you know, a term of the Mental Health Act, allows for individual called guardians to be appointed. And they're people with those special legal powers under the Mental Health Act to make some decisions on a person's behalf who have a mental disorder. They're a basically less restrictive option to a hospital section, but nevertheless, the guardian has the right to decide things like where a person lives, and they can also require the person to attend special places for medical treatment, work and education, etc. DoLS and guardianship, DoLS and guardianships can operate at the same time. In fact, there are a number of cases where this has been decided in NM versus Kent in 2015, I think that was. The solicitor argued in a tribunal that the guardianship wouldn't be necessary because there was a DoLS in place for the person, and that person wasn't able to leave the place of residence in any case. But in that case, this was Mr. M. He was a guy who was in his early 40s. He was described as having mild learning disabilities. He had paedophilic sexual interests, and he had previously been sort of setting fire and setting light to places, and he was verbally and physically aggressive as well. He hoarded materials related to children and sought to contact them by kind of dropping notes on the floor, asking them to contact him. And the judge there said that in that case, that there are important differences between DoLS and guardianships that will take account of different circumstances. So where a DoLS assumes that the person lacks capacity to make the relevant decisions in the best interests, guardianship is not based on an assessment of the person's best interest, basically. You know, it arises out of the Mental Health Act. Secondly, a DoLS can't impose a requirement that the person resides in a particular address, whereas a guardian can, and can be taken back to that address by various public authorities such as the police. And DoLS can't authorise, thirdly, DoLS can't authorise anyone to give or consent to treatment for someone with a mental disorder. So there are occasions when that might be, of course, be important to admit a DoLS at the same time as a guardianship, and I don't think there's any suggestion that's going to change under the LPS framework as well. But what it does do for us today, it means that there is a central importance here for IMHAs to stay up to speed with these developments for the liberty protection safeguards as well. And so finally, adults living in a private residential home, DoLS applies to all registered care and nursing homes, essentially, whether it's public, private, or charity sector, and irrespective of the groups of residents that people care for, such as older people, or someone's got dementia, etc., and irrespective of how the placements are funded. And this is going to continue to be the case on DoLS as far as we're aware. On to the next slide, please, Kate. So these are, they're almost rhetorical, these questions. I find myself apologising, but it's worth looking under the bonnet of them, I suppose. Is what, you know, sort of when can you deprive someone of their liberty? When you assume that they lack capacity. B, if a mental capacity assessment says that they lack capacity to decide for themselves, and if family members believe that it's in the person's best interest, or if it's confirmed that it is in their best interest. So what does anyone think about that? 10-second countdown. Okay, so how do we do there, Kate? when you assume they lack capacity. That's sort of lots of people got that right. It's essentially unlawful under the terms of the Mental Capacity Act to assume that somebody lacks capacity for the purposes of anything really, but certainly as far as the DoLS is concerned. If a mental capacity assessment says that they lack capacity to decide for themselves, and if family members believe it's in the best interest, well, not really, no. It needs to go much further than just consulting with family members and believing it being in the person's best. Of course, family members can be best interest consultees, but the work of a DoLS must consult with a lot more people than family members, or if it's confirmed that it's in their best interest, and that's of course when you can deprive somebody of their liberty. And the next and last quiz question, Kate, is how many different assessments will be carried out to determine that adults ought to be authorised? So obviously there is the assessment such as the mental capacity assessment, the best interest assessment, but how many assessments do you think that there are? Okay, 10-second countdown. And how are we getting on there, Kate? Right then, okay, so 6 is the answer to that. You've got the mental capacity assessment, the best interest assessment, age assessment, an age assessment, obviously because of what we said before about being over 18, the 18 or over, sorry, the mental health assessment, the eligibility assessment, and then of course there's the no refusals assessment if somebody had written down, for example, in advance that they don't want certain treatments to be applied. That's called the no refusals assessment. Of course, as many as necessary for the social work to decide. Well, so a problem that has dogged the social care sector for years has been the kind of perfunctory way that DoLS has developed into a process that appears to have taken over. That was an issue that was really important in the case of Mark and Stephen Neary. I think some people might know about that. We'll be looking a little bit more closely at Mark and Stephen's circumstances later in 2011. And clearly processes are important, and recording the thinking is crucial to the purposes of accountability. However, for a lot of people, including myself, I've got to say, on many occasions, it's just become a process-driven kind of duty with all the Form 3s and Form 5s and those kind of things, various assessment. And within that, it's central purpose in terms of kind of the ensuring that people's human rights are respected when they're engaged. It seems to get lost sometimes as we follow this kind of process. And as advocates, we're really well positioned to refocus that process to back to its central purpose and in terms of human rights. I struggle to think of anything more important, quite honestly, than the advocate's role in that respect. And as advocates, our job is often unapologetically to remind public services that is the case. And put bluntly, not to be locked up without a good reason is a human right under the terms of all those different human rights structures that we've seen. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please, just reminding ourselves of what those human rights framework is. We've already seen in the sky. We already saw in the sky video there about Eleanor Roosevelt and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are 3 articles that I've just kind of selected from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So let's remind ourselves where that came from. It was the horrors of the Second World War and all those human rights that were destroyed through that period. And this is I suppose really what I'm saying there is that there's a golden thread, both legally and in real terms of people's human rights, right back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm not suggesting that human rights didn't exist before then, but that's where you can track our golden thread of DoLS and liberty protection safeguards right back to in the modern kind of legal sort of sense of thing. And on to the next slide, please. Okay. We've also got the European Convention on Human Rights to remind ourselves about. I won't labour that, but it's Article 5, 8 and 14 in particular, ones which seem to crop up in the context of when the court protection rulings are there, and also they figure highly in the Code of Practice around the Mental Capacity Act and those other kind of approaches as well. In particular, we need to think about Article 5 there, because that is the direct issue when we're talking about people's liberty. But there are also aspects of Article 5 that are really important to us when we talk about DoLS and LPS. And that's the right for someone to be able to raise an objection with a state through a court if they believe that their deprivation is unlawful, for example. And it's that human right which is engaged, and maybe something that might be controversial, as we'll see later when we come to the liberty protection safeguards, the ability that people have got to be able to get support from advocates and from other people to be able to challenge those deprivations. Article 8 is obviously engaged as well, because what we're talking about here is somebody's right to, and I'm sorry about the gender-specific way that that's written in there, but that's not me. It's the European Convention on Human Rights and the Human Rights Act as well. And just I haven't put the Human Rights Act in this, but the way that that's interpreted in our country, of course, is through the Human Rights Act, which has the same articles in that as well. So when someone's is being moved away, for example, from their private home, from the family, in the same way that Stephen Neary was in 2010-11, and kind of taken into a care home, quite obviously there, and that is what the Judge Peter Jackson, he concentrated a lot of his words upon how Stephen Neary's right to a private, and Mark Neary's dad's right to a private family life were interfered with by Hillingdon on that occasion. On to the next slide, please, Kate. There is the United Nations Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. More articles there. So there's a whole raft of things that we can rely on still, and the LPS hasn't taken any of these things away. They're still really important to us all from whatever perspective. But it gives us an opportunity as advocates to be able to hang things on a hook when we need to raise an issue, of course, around DoLS and liberty protection safeguards with those public authorities who are engaging when we're supporting people. So on to the next slide, please, Kate. The legal framework for us here, obviously, is the Mental Capacity Act, is the Human Rights Act, which I apologise isn't there, the Care Act, the Mental Health Act, and the Equality Act 2010 as well. All of those provide a really good framework for us to be able to put together that sits behind. The interesting one there for me, actually, as well as obviously the Mental Capacity Act 2005 and the new amendment from 2019 that has brought, sort of into play the liberty protection safeguards, is also the Care Act, because as the Sky video said earlier, liberty protection safeguards really. The hope is that they will be handled and dealt with as part of the overall care planning, the assessment process, and the care planning process. So they become part of that whole structure, really. So rather than kind of someone's liberty being deprived of them and then doing the kind of assessment afterwards, they should all be in place as part of, and very smoothly as part of, that whole thinking part, and that's why we need to keep a very vigilant eye out as advocates that is in fact happening as well. I'm particularly concerned at the moment actually about an issue of covert medication. You know, when people have their residential homes, and it's authorised by sort of clinicians, often pharmacists can hide someone's medication in food if they don't want to take it, or they drop it in someone's tea or something. I'm concerned that that's done properly. There's a very rigorous approach, the legal approach that needs to take place there, and actually fits under DoLS. I'm not quite sure, having not seen the code of practice there, that's really the concern I've got at the moment, that to make sure that really is articulated within the whole liberty protection safeguards as well. So I can stop there for a minute, Kate. Have we got any questions there that are arising from the chat box that we need to think about?
Yeah, got a really, really beautiful one from Rebecca. How does DoLS protect people with autism who are in long-stay hospitals, and it does not seem to be reviewed effectively enough to help them move into less restrictive settings?
Well, as it happens, I happen to agree with you totally there. I've sort of been an advocate for people that are in long-stay hospitals as well, and notwithstanding the whole transforming care agenda, STOMP, and those kind of things. So when people are deprived of the liberty under the Mental Health Act, it's under that legal framework that the decisions are made, those clinical decisions are made. However, I must say this as well. I know somebody that I was an advocate with over the past 12 months, who we managed to help. We call it a cold plan, actually, to kind of get out of to get out of the hospital. And the DoLS was obviously important then, because what that did then, it protected the person when they were moving on into what was their own accommodation then. So we needed to very carefully fit together the DoLS framework with from my perspective as an advocate, arguing from the person's perspective as a safeguard, so it kind of dovetailed into the Mental Health Act duties that were there as well, and protections under the Mental Health Act. Okay.
Thanks, Tom. One from Mike. Good afternoon, Aidan. Currently, I'm an RPR. LPS will be for IMCAs and RPRs will be phased out. Will we as RPRs have the opportunity of becoming the appropriate person?
Sorry, will we as?
The RPR, so currently is an RPR.
Yeah.
Will they have the opportunity to become the appropriate person?
Well, an RPR role goes under LPS, as you probably know, but the appropriate person really will be considered as part of that whole earlier structure. I have got a slide very soon that talks about that process of how the LPS is anticipated to work. So hopefully that will be a bit clearer then. But the answer to that really is that RPRs will, if it's the relevant person representing a family member, the answer to that is yes, absolutely. And then, of course, the alternative to that would be an IMCA as well.
Got you. So, and the unpaid RPR will become the appropriate person, but we're saying that the paid RPR, the expectation is no, you wouldn't be the appropriate person, but you could.
Well, that's right. Yeah, Section 39, which RPR sits under, has been reformed then by the Amendment Act. So that goes, but IMCAs are still around. But I've got some issues there that I'd like to talk through a little bit later, if that's okay.
Can we do one more? Take a quick one.
Okay.
Take a quick one. Is DoLS ever used for a private home? By that, I don't mean a private residential care home, but like a private.
In someone's private home. No, if a DoLS appears in someone's, at the moment, if a DoLS appears in someone's private home, it would need to be authorised by the Court of Protection, essentially, is the short answer to that. But under LPS, that is extended to all settings, and not only that, it becomes portable as well. So if someone has an LPS in like a residential home, that can then be applied there in other settings as well. Can I just move on, Kate? Is that okay?
Yeah.
And come back to some of the questions again afterwards. So if we go to the next slide, I'm not going to go, if you don't mind, through the positive history of DoLS. So yeah, let's just look a little bit. Sorry, can we just come back to Formwood again, please, Kate?
Oh, sorry, I think I wanted to skip it.
This has got nothing to do with Matt Damon, obviously, and it was a really important case, this, where a guy called H, as he was known as, was deprived of the liberty. And see, before Formwood, what could happen would be, someone could they could deprive someone of the liberty without them really ever really seeing any kind of a legal approach applied to that. Just a clinician, basically, they just said, well, it's in someone's best interest that they live here. A lot of those people that lived in those mental, the old mental health hospitals with learning disabilities and all this, were subject just to clinical decision making there. But what happened with H was a really important thing for us, and this shouldn't change under the LPS as well, because this is the root of the Mental Capacity Act, where it actually came from there. And it's this, that H was a guy who was autistic, and he lived in this hospital. And what happened was, Mr. and Mrs. E, I think you knew one of these people, didn't you, Kate? Mr. E, did you? I think.
Graham, yeah, Graham.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, lovely man.
Away.
He passed away last year, didn't he? But amazing people. They decided they had this land and everything like that, and those animals on the land and everything. So H went to live with them. He's having a great time. And he was living with them for quite some time, and his whole life had transformed. And then what happened was, one day, he was autistic, this guy. One day, there's a different driver on the bus to take him to this daycare facility. The driver went a different route that he was expected to go down. And I think there were some different people on the bus. Obviously changed the landscape of H's day for that day. And he ended up in Formwood. And Mr. and Mrs. E. Graham and his partner weren't allowed to see H even. And it was really, really quite oppressive, I think, how it was described later. In the shakedown for that, what happened in the court was, though, that it was decided that he could come back to live with Mr. and Mrs. E eventually. But it took a whole lot of very, very painful legal sort of hearings and everything for that to happen. And from that came the Mental Capacity Act. But what that means, though, and that's the real sort of our real sort of modern route now for the Mental Capacity Act. So yeah, if we can go on, Kate, to the slide. I'm not going to go through the 6 assessments. You can see those afterwards in the Martin Airey's case, a retreat from the process-driven best interest. Interestingly enough,
what slide? Sorry,
it's slide number 24. Sorry, Kate.
Keep them going.
Yeah. I'm going to whip through the Cheshire West stuff as well, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's get to the LPS. So a retreat from the process-driven best. Interestingly enough, the best interest decision making, kind of that narrative about best interest decision making, disappears in the liberty protection safeguards, and we'll see what that turns into afterwards. The point I wanted to make here about that was Stephen and Mark Canary that I mentioned before, who'd been, Mark said he was stolen, his son was stolen from him effectively and taken to this place that was in Hillingdon. And when he finally came back, the whole focus of that was around best interest and how Hillingdon had acted, really. And what the judge said there is that the process of best interest should never be just a routine piece of paperwork. One of the things that I've got to say about the liberty protection safeguards that I've seen so far, the whole process thing, is it kind of makes it more temporal again, really. It kind of makes you think more carefully about what really is best interest, even without necessarily calling them best interest sometimes. Talks about, sort of things being reasonable, proportionate, and those kind of things, really. And hopefully that will help us to, as advocates, give us something to help focus public services minds a little bit more on what really is in people's best interest, and away from that process-driven, this is a best interest assessment kind of approach that's taken. I don't know about that yet, and I think that the applications to the court protection might prove me wrong at a later date, but who knows. And then on to slide 26, please, Kate. The gilded cage is still okay. A well-known phrase from this is from Baroness Hale in the Cheshire West. Lady Hale. I've got to say, I'm a real groupie for Lady Hale. This is an incredible. Some of the judgments that she's made are fascinating. And here's what she said: it doesn't really matter how gilded the cage is, how nice it looks, and how beautiful that, if you like, residential home is. It doesn't matter if someone's deprived of their liberty. That is a fundamental thing that goes to the core of the human spirit, and it's part of the Article 5 and 8 approach there. The next slide, though, is best interest. Now, this is a best interest balance sheet, and I know that they're not going to be calling it best interest decision making in the LPS, but this is a tool that you might that I've brought to the table here that you might like to consider in your practice. It's used by professionals that are doing best interest assessments. I actually like to use it as an advocate as well. I like to go through that balance sheet, that sort of what's good and what's bad in those kind of categories there, to be able to understand. I'm kind of arguing against myself here in that process-driven thing there, but I'm just saying this is a framework of thought I like to use as an advocate to help me, and I'm going to continue to do that under the LPS framework as well. The next couple of slides actually are from Lucy Bonagea from 2012-13, an amazing person who used to write up the, you'll know this, Kate, the Independent Mental Capacity Advocate report, annual report. Does she still do that, Kate? No, it's stopped now, is it? Yeah.
She left a few years ago. When she left,
did she? Yeah, but if you can dig this one out, I'll put the link in at the end to it's really good because it explains what us as advocates believe both are good practice and what acts as a barrier to our practice as IMCAs, and that's going to continue into the LPS, but also as well into the LPS. So the next slide is just a quote from the Care Act statutory guidance, all about the importance of DoLS when it comes to safeguarding. It's one of those things that provides that legal link, that linkage between the Mental Capacity Act and the safeguarding within the Care Act statutory guidance. So 2 slides on, Kate, you've got the, this is the new LPS framework, sorry, slide 32. And now this is the flowchart this is where we come into now. And I put this out there really by way of an assistance for you, really. I've not managed to bend my head, quite honestly, around each and every one of those boxes, because there are questions that arise for me as an advocate out of every one of those boxes as well, quite honestly. But what we can do maybe just for a few minutes is work our way through that that process, if you'll bear with us for a little bit. So the first one there is when it's believed that a deprivation of liberty is occurring. So that doesn't change really. So between DoLS and LPS, either people believe that it is or it isn't. Although there is a question there about who believes there's a deprivation of liberty going to happen, and then that triggers the liberty protection safeguards. Now, in the third box across there is this, and this is really important for us now, is that the responsible body identifies an independent capacity advocate, but that's in the absence. As I think, sorry, there was a question before about the RPR there, in the absence of an appropriate person being available. But there's a really important part of that as well. Is this, and this is all enshrined, this process, by there's a new schedule. The old schedule that sat behind section 39 of the Mental Capacity Act was A1, it was Schedule A1. This now has become, that's gone, and we've got one that was very creatively considered, sort of named AA1 by the law. That was clever of them, the law commission, and it replaces that Schedule A1. It's hard to think about some of the details of these things in the absence of the code of practice, actually, I've found, which has been really frustrating for me. But the appointment of the IMCA is if it's required and appropriate, basically. Now, one of the reasons why I've read Alex Rupp-Keene has got a brilliant blog that he does, and he is a real fault. He is a legal authority on all of this stuff. He's actually worked with the Law Commission on various parts of the development of the liberty protection safeguards. The last few slides you'll see, there are links to his blog and everything. He says something really quite interesting about that, about the thinking that even at the moment, local authorities will say that they don't believe it's in someone's best interest to appoint an IMCA, just in case that person develops unrealistic expectations of the process. So we won't actually appoint an independent. This has been run past the court, unbelievably. Right? We won't appoint the independent advocate because it might increase the person's expectations unrealistically. And I'm hoping that doesn't become
that
part
didn't
of the
stand
thinking.
up, does it, Aidan?
Sorry?
That didn't stand up, does it?
No, it didn't. But it's interesting because it gives you a window into the. I'm trying to work out what this reasonable and appropriate bit means. Quite honestly, I still can't figure that out because the duty isn't to appoint an independent advocate as it is under the DoLS. The duty is to consider whether it's that's. So it's not the actual appointment, as far as I can see at the moment, of the independent advocate there. There's going to be certain, and I wonder if. One of the reasons could be, well, we haven't got enough money to pay to commission an independent advocate service, so there's not enough of them available. So, hey, let's get on with this process anyway. You just don't know how that's going to insert. What I think it does do, I think it heralds a fair amount of cases off to the court protection there. I think you can see those on the way, and they're probably already being written up, So they're proportionate and to erase those assessments. And they're the assessments, and the next thing you can see that must be arranged there. Now this is interesting because we start to think then if you think in the first iterations of the Amendment Act, the assumption was going to be that residential home managers are going to be asked just to do these assessments themselves, basically, and then just report them up to the responsible body. And so rather than the best interest assessor going in, as it happens under DoLS at the moment, it'll just be the people themselves, the managers themselves. But there was a retreat from that really. But so it means that the responsible body now still must keep a handle on this, but they can give it to the residential home manager to do the not to do the assessment, but to appoint someone to do that assessment as well. And that's raised all kinds of questions within the legal world that I'm aware of. Well, what if, that creates a conflict of interest? Are they going to be choosing certain people to do that then? That's the. No, there isn't. I've just seen that question come in. There isn't an outcry basically over the removal of the RPR as I've seen yet, because they've got the appropriate person that replaces that really. We come up to the approved mental capacity professional role. This is a new role, a brand new role in the LPS framework, and essentially we think that's probably going to be best interest assessors that will be retrained into that role as well, but others as well. Importantly, what the government have made a point of saying is that they don't have to be employed by local authorities; they can commission that work out to others as well. And so then obviously it's either not authorised and then it's authorised. This is from the Department of Health, this flow chart, you probably see at the bottom as well. And the person does not wish to challenge this authorisation, so it's authorised, or if the person wishes to, as is the case now, it could go through to the court of protection, and that might be something that we would do. Section 21A still stands, basically, So just very quickly then, I know I haven't got long to go. You'll see the next slides here that I'll leave you to read for yourselves from DoLS to LPS slides. There's a few slides there that tells you what the circumstances are at the moment under DoLS. So, for example, that flexibility of settings, it applies in care homes or at hospitals at the moment, but it'll apply in any setting in the future. There's a bit of a discussion that goes on the next few slides. Go to slide 36, please, Kate. There's another slide there about the age 18 or age 16 or over, the tests, and from DoLS to LPS is the IMCAs. Now, this is an important one for us. I just want to finish on this, if that's okay. So the appointed by the supervisory body to be part of the assessment if there are no relatives or friends to consult. It's what we were talking about before, or their unpaid RPI to help them understand. That's what happens at the moment. Therefore, the LPS really will be for the responsible body to decide really if that's needed, including the challenge to authorise to support. So the LPS won't change that much, I don't think, under the, in terms of the essence of what we do. It's the process issue, and then there obviously the the duty to appoint really, which is more of a concern to me. So problems for the IMCA, just come to the end at slide 42 there, is that there's supposed to be a slicker and less administrative process. Well, we wonder if there's something lost by the changes to the appointment of IMCAs here. Under DoLS, there was an obligation to appoint an IMCA, and that was unequivocal. And although, as I said before, authorities have been known to argue that the appointment of an IMCA is not in the person's best interest because it might increase their hopes. So the first and fundamental problem is that there's no duty actually to, as such, to appoint an IMCA. To take all reasonable steps is how it's put. To appoint an IMCA if certain circumstances exist. So there you go. Certain all reasonable steps. And the problem for the responsibilities is, if I may say so, is the risks that they may run in being able to understand that legal word, reasonable, which bounces around like a pinball on many legal cases as well, not just in social care and health, but in contracts, criminal and reasonable, and what isn't. So there you go. That's me. Sorry, just at the very end. There are a couple of slides at the end when you get that have popped on there. The last two slides, really, Kate, are for information purposes. These are the mental capacity. These are the links that I'm hoping that you might find useful. These are the links that I often go. These are my go-to links, if you see what I mean, to find out what's going on with LPS, and two slides at the end there that hopefully will be a help. So there you go. I can take a breath now. I don't think I did take a breath all the way through that. Sweat on.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Thanks, Aidan. Such a comprehensive, journey that you've shared there.
I don't know if it was actually, Kate. I've done my best there, trying to wrap it into an hour, and I'm hoping that people found it, or at least some parts of it, interesting as well. And it was pitched at the right place. If it wasn't, I'd apologise.
No, it's great. And isn't it refreshing everyone to kind of have an advocate's perspective? No, there's loads of gratitude in the chat box. I suppose just a final opportunity for any questions. If I'm just going to try and skim, but sometimes the chat box moves so quickly it's difficult to see them all. But if there are any, and people can come on, I know you can't, it's a webinar. No, but type any questions if you did want Aidan to take any more. Just lots of thanks.
Oh, well, thanks everyone as well. Yeah, and thanks for sticking around and listening to me. That boring, droning voice of mine. So good, yeah, thanks a lot. And thanks, Kate, for inviting me to do this. I've enjoyed putting it together. It's helped me to focus my mind actually as well.
Grace, this is where you offer to come back and do another one.
If you want. Yeah, well, so I'll tell you what, when the code of practice is out and regulations, I think that's going to give us something really important to think about as advocates
Totally, yeah. So I
You
think
know, I think-
our plan is to run some sessions, because there's some really practical things like you're going to be terrified when you start to see how many IMCAs you're going to need for the new LPS. It's massive. The impact assessment suggests 10,000 new IMCAs need to be recruited. So if you just think about that for your area, you know, according to the figures, some areas are going to need 100 IMCAs. You know, currently there might be 2 or 3. So, and you might be increasing that to say 30 IMCAs. It's massive. So there's loads of things that we need to be thinking of when we get the code of practice. And yeah, we'll definitely be putting on some sessions. So maybe we can get you back, Aidan, at that point to get your take on some.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to keep my finger on the pulse of it. You know, and as I say, if I've not managed to get something there that's absolutely up to date, but I think that's reasonably up to date from where we are anyway. And then, as I say, when that comes out, I think we're going to have some real meat to be able to
chew on.
Then. Even though I am a vegetarian, actually, I keep saying that, don't I?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
Okay.
Cool. All right then, guys. Thanks so much for
thank you very
attending.
much, everyone. All right.
Thanks, Aidan. Take care. Bye.
And so.